Readers, have you been starting to reread? I bet some of your books are just filled with post it flags indicating where you're rereading and what you're finding. Rereading might feel like a little thing to you, but it's actually an incredibly big deal because it helps you make sense of how all the parts in your book fit together. To show you what a big deal it is, let's try an experiment. I want you to go back to the lesson platform and watch a video. This is a video about the idea of implicit bias. I'm not going to say any more though, because the video is going to teach you about it. Watch the video Peanut Butter Jelly and Racism from the New York Times collection of 25 mini films for exploring race, bias, and identity with students, and then come back to the lesson. Based on the first viewing, what can you now say about implicit bias? Take a minute to pause this teaching video and jot your thinking in your reading notebook. Now I want you to go back and watch the video a second time. And before you push play, think about some questions that you'll have in mind as you view it the second time. Readers, do you feel like you have a little better understanding of what implicit bias is after watching the video a second time? I'm going to teach you a tip today that is so easy to try and that has such powerful results that I think you'll make it a big part of your reading life. The tip is this: reread. Reread parts that are confusing, parts that seem important, and parts that you're reminded of when you read a new part. I'm going to read on in Hidden Figures. By this point in the book, World War II is long over, and the work at Langley is starting to change. We're going to hear about a young mathematician, Christine, who is about to embark on an important new project. Usually, I decide when we stop and think about our reading. But today, I want you to take that critical part of my job. Today, when you think it's a good time to stop and reread, I want you to pause the video and think about what your questions are and what parts seem confusing or important. Young, gifted, and black. While Mary Jackson was busy at work helping the NACA build supersonic airplanes, girls in high school were beginning to imagine different possibilities for themselves. Even though teaching was still the best option available, there were now more career choices. On October 5th, 1957, Christine Mann, a senior at the Allen High School for Girls in Asheville, North Carolina, left her dorm room first thing in the morning and walked to the library. Her job was to open the library and organize the newspapers and magazines before anyone else arrived. She took a moment to read the headlines as she set up the displays. Since the beginning of the year, newspapers around the country had discussed the racial crisis in Little Rock, Arkansas. 9 black teenagers trying to integrate the all-white Central High School had turned the state's capital city into a military battleground. The Arkansas National Guard had been called out to prevent the black students from entering the school. In response, the federal government sent U.S. Army troops to escort the 9 students into the school. The crisis unfolded over days, and each morning Christine followed the news of the brave children who were close to her in age. Are you thinking that this is a good place to stop? This part may seem confusing to some of you, or feel important, or connect to past parts. If you're like me, you have heard of the Little Rock event, but I can't always remember exactly what happened. When a part is confusing, it helps me to generate a question about what I'm confused about and to keep that question in mind as I reread, trying to answer it. I'm going to reread, and as I do, think to yourself, what happened in Little Rock? Since the beginning of the year, newspapers around the country had discussed the racial crisis in Little Rock, Arkansas. 9 black teenagers trying to integrate the all white Central High School had turned the state's capital city into a military battleground. The Arkansas National Guard had been called out to prevent the black students from entering the school. In response, the federal government sent U.S. Army troops to escort the 9 students into the school. The crisis unfolded over days, and each morning Christine followed the news of the brave children who were close to her in age. Pause for a second to think about what's happening in this part, to understand it more clearly. Readers, do you feel that hearing this again helped you to remember or understand more clearly what went on in Little Rock in 1957? It makes sense that not everyone needed this. Different readers will need to reread different parts. But let's keep trying. I'm going to give you another tip. To use rereading most strategically, you not only need to realize when a part is not totally clear, you also need to decide if it's important enough to reread for a better understanding. Because let's face it, if you reread everything, you'll never get through a book. So this time, as I read, try 2 steps. The first step is listen for where you might want to reread. Next, decide if it's worth it. Does it seem important to something big in the book? I think Little Rock was pretty important. So if you find another part, you might want to jot a little bit in your reading notebook about the part that you think you'd want to reread and why. The showdown had dominated the headlines, and then the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. The Russians did it. They had created a satellite and launched it into orbit, and they did it before the United States. With tensions between the two countries already high because of the Cold War, this news put everyone further on edge. The United States needed to catch up. Caption: a replica of the Soviet Union Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite to be put into outer space. Credit: courtesy of the National Air and Space Museum and NASA. At the Langley Memorial Aeronautics Laboratory, there was great pressure to outperform the Russians at 360 miles above Earth, the altitude at which a satellite would fly around the planet. For the engineers, beating the Russians in space was a matter of personal and professional pride. In the rest of the country, the fear was political. Red made satellite flashes across the U.S., read the Daily Press in Newport News. Sphere tracked in 4 crossings over U.S., read the New York Times. When Christine read the news, she felt she had fallen asleep in one world and awakened in another. October 4th, 1957 marked the end of the post-war era, a time when the world was rebuilding after the destruction of World War II. The morning of October 5th was the official dawn of the space age, the beginning of mankind's realizing a long-held dream to fly beyond Earth's atmosphere and visit outer space. I could reread here, but I think we can get the gist of it. The Russians put a satellite into space, and people in the United States want to do the same. What do you think? Do you understand enough to keep reading? When you're ready to keep reading, go back to the lesson platform for the second video.